When the pickaxe finally shattered the lath, the air that rushed out didn't smell of rot. It smelled of secrets kept too long, ozone, old paper, and something metallic that made the teeth ache. Doctor. Alina Voss thought she'd inherited a worthless, decaying farmhouse. She was wrong. Behind that wall lay a passage spiraling into darkness and a conspiracy worth killing for. Alina Voss was 36, exhausted and professionally ruined. As a forensic archivist at the National Maritime Museum in Baltimore, she spent her days reconstructing the paper trails of dead empires. While her own life collapsed under the weight of her late father's gambling debts and a wrongful termination lawsuit, she survived on vending machine coffee and the stubbornness of someone who'd spent years proving documents weren't forgeries. So when a thick cream envelope arrived from a boutique law firm in Boston, Halloway, St. James and Cole, Alina assumed it was another subpoena from her father's creditors. Instead, it was a summons that would detonate her life. The meeting took place in a conference room that smelled of lemon oil and old money. Marcus Cole, a silver-haired estate attorney with the watchful eyes of a man who'd buried many family secrets, delivered the news. Alina's great-aunt, Dr. Isolde Voss, had died at 94. Isolde was the family phantom, a Cold War-era scientist who'd supposedly destroyed the Voss shipping patents in a fit of paranoia during the 1970s. Alina had never met her. Her father had spoken of Isolde only as a warning about genius curdling into madness. "Dr. Voss," Marcus explained, adjusting his cufflinks, "you are the sole remaining heir. Isolde left you the entirety of her estate, specifically Voss House on Meridian Ridge in coastal Maine." Alina felt a brief, wild surge of hope. A house. Was it saleable? Marcus offered a tight, pitying smile. "The property is severely compromised. It has been effectively abandoned for 30 years. Isolde spent her final decades in a research hospital in Switzerland, refusing to return to American soil. Furthermore, the town of Dunwich has condemned the structure. There are approximately $90,000 in back taxes and code violations. You have precisely 45 days to clear personal effects before the state seizes the land." The hope curdled. Not a windfall, a burial, but Alina had an archivist's patience and the desperate clarity of someone with nothing left to lose. If there were scientific papers, antique instruments, or rare books in the rotting house, she might authenticate and sell them, enough to survive another month. She packed her father's old Subaru and drove north. Voss House sat at the end of a washed-out fire road, choked by spruce and ghost birch. When Alina finally parked before the building, a chill settled between her shoulder blades despite the August heat. The house was a sprawling Second Empire wreck. Mansard roof collapsed on one side like a broken wing, windows boarded with plywood that had warped into grimacing faces. Fieldstone foundation swallowed by ground cover. It looked less like architecture and more like a geological formation that had given up. Alina cut the hasp on the kitchen door and stepped inside. The air was suffocating. Mildew mouse, the particular silence of places where nothing living had walked in decades. Dust hung in the single beam of her headlamp. Furniture hulked under drop cloths that had become shrouds. For 3 days, Alina worked methodically. She sifted through waterlogged cartons and corroded equipment, finding little of value. The rumors appeared true. Isolde had liquidated anything portable long ago. But on the 4th morning, Alina breached the observatory on the 3rd floor, and the narrative of her mad great-aunt began to fracture. The observatory was chaos. The copper dome had leaked for years. Star charts lay pulped on the floor, but it was the drafting table that arrested her. It was buried under strata of technical drawings. Alina, blowing dust from the top sheet, unrolled a vellum schematic. It wasn't the ravings of a paranoid. It was a precise, obsessive record of construction dated between 1974 and 1979. March 4, 1974. 3,000 pounds marine-grade titanium delivered via fishing vessel. April 12, 1975. 2 redundant geothermal exchange systems, lead shielded. August 9, 1976. Independent communications array installed. Contractor terminated after inquiries. Alina frowned, tracing the faded ink. Why would a supposedly bankrupt scientist spend millions retrofitting a Victorian farmhouse with bunker specifications? And where had it all gone? She'd walked every room. No titanium. No geothermal systems. She unrolled the final drawing, covered in Isolde's cramped script. They have found the frequency. The wolves are at the door. The observatory is sealed. Let them believe I am defeated. Let them believe I am mad. The false wall conceals the truth. Alina's pulse stuttered. The false wall. Her search was interrupted the next morning by the crunch of tires on gravel. A slate-gray Range Rover purred up the washed-out road, absurdly pristine against the wilderness. Out stepped Victor Crane. He was a man who wore his wealth like armor, tailored charcoal wool despite the humidity, silver at the temples precisely calibrated to suggest distinction. A smile that reached his eyes but stopped somewhere behind them. "Dr. Voss, I presume," Victor called, picking his way across the overgrown dooryard. Alina stood on the sagging porch, gripping the wrecking bar she'd been using to pry open swollen casement windows. "Who are you?" "Victor Crane, Meridian Biotech," he said, producing a card heavy enough to be a weapon. "I've had my eye on this ridge for some time. I understand you're facing a deadline with the town. 45 days. That's not generous. I'm prepared to offer $300,000 cash transferred today. You sign the quitclaim. Walk away and your financial difficulties resolve themselves." Alina stared at him. 300,000. It would clear her father's debts, her legal fees, leave enough to rent an apartment without roaches. She was a breath from acceptance. Then Victor made his error. "It's really the elevation I want," he continued smoothly, surveying the house with hunger poorly disguised as assessment. "The structure is a total loss. Pity about the foundation, limestone bedrock, completely compromised by the groundwater shift in the 80s. We'll need to blast and regrade." Alina froze. She'd studied the geological surveys in Isolde's files that very morning. Voss House sat on granite schist, not limestone. The water table was 60 feet down. Victor was lying. He knew something about the house she didn't, and he was desperate to possess it. "I'll need to consider this," Alina said slowly, tightening her grip on the wrecking bar. Victor's friendly mask slipped, revealing something calculating and cold. "Don't be foolish, Dr. Voss. You're an archivist out of your depth. People who excavate Isolde Voss's history tend to discover things that damage them. Take the money. I'll return tomorrow for your signature." He turned and drove away, leaving Alina with a terrifying clarity. Her great-aunt hadn't been paranoid. Someone had truly hunted her. That evening, a coastal storm rolled in. The house groaned under wind that smelled of salt and violence, rain lashing the boarded windows. Alina, fueled by adrenaline and instant coffee, sat in the center of the observatory, measuring tape in hand. She recalled Isolde's note. "The false wall conceals the truth." Alina measured. The exterior wall of the observatory was 14 feet. The interior wall was 9, 5 feet of void, hidden space. She moved to the northern wall. It was obscured by a massive floor-to-ceiling cabinet of scientific instruments, brass telescopes, sextants, chronometers, appearing built into the structure itself. She searched for hidden latches, secret mechanisms. Nothing. Frustration cresting, Alina retrieved the heavy pickaxe she'd bought from the hardware store in Dunwich. She stood before the beautiful antique cabinetry. If she was wrong, she was destroying the only valuable artifact in the house. But Victor Crane's hungry eyes flashed in her memory. Alina swung. Crack, the iron head smashed through mahogany. Wood splintered across the floor. She swung again. Her breath came ragged, hands blistering. She shattered the cabinet, revealing water-stained plaster behind. She didn't stop. She drove the pick into the wall itself. The ancient plaster exploded in white dust, exposing wooden lath beneath. Alina jammed the wrecking bar into the gap, ripping backward. Rusty nails screamed. A rush of air struck her face. Not the stale house air. Shockingly cold, smelling of ozone, old paper, machine oil. The breath of something waiting. Coughing through dust, Alina clicked on her headlamp and aimed the beam into the jagged opening. Her heart stopped. No dust motes danced in the hidden space. Instead, perfectly preserved, gleaming under harsh light, stood a heavy steel blast door, slightly ajar. Beyond it, a spiral staircase of iron descended into absolute dark. Alina stepped through, floorboards protesting, and peered down. Great-Aunt Isolde hadn't lost her fortune. She'd entombed it, and Alina was walking into her trap. The iron grating was freezing through her boots. As she descended, the humid August atmosphere vanished, replaced by biting cold and the sharp scent of industrial preservatives. She counted. 20. 40, 60. She was deep below the foundation, into the bedrock of the coastal ridge. At the bottom, the staircase deposited her on a platform before the blast door she'd glimpsed above. It was vault-grade steel, Cold War military specification, cracked open an inch in silent invitation. Alina wedged the wrecking bar into the gap and threw her weight against the steel. With a shriek of unoiled hinges, the door swung inward. Absolute darkness. She swept her headlamp across the void. The beam caught poured concrete walls, riveted steel plating. To her left, a massive olive drum machine dominated the corner, a diesel generator, exhaust stacks penetrating the ceiling. Beside it, a gray electrical panel. Alina approached. Gripped the main breaker, shoved it upward. Nothing. Then a mechanical growl through the floor. The generator coughed, sputtered, roared to life. Overhead, fluorescent tubes flickered in rows, bathing the bunker in stark white light. Alina's headlamp dropped. She stood in a climate-controlled vault that belonged to a government facility, not a supposedly mad woman in coastal Maine. The center held a long table of stainless steel. Lining the walls were 4 massive safe deposit vaults, each with biometric locks, but the far wall made her blood slow. It was covered in a manic web of documents, photographs, news clippings pinned to magnetic boards. Red yarn connected them in frantic patterns. Alina moved closer, scanning yellowed articles. All focused on one entity, Meridian Biotech. She recognized a younger Victor Crane in several photographs, beside an older man with the same predatory smile, his father, Reginald Crane. The clippings detailed pharmaceutical acquisitions, patent thefts, clinical trials across the global south. But beneath the public articles lay private documents. Isolde hadn't collected news. She'd investigated a conspiracy. Alina traced yarn from the Cranes to photocopied wire transfers through Macau and the Seychelles. To suppressed FDA reports detailing deliberate data manipulation in the 1970s. Meridian's blockbuster cardiac drug, based on stolen Voss research, that had killed hundreds before recall. "They didn't ruin you," Alina whispered. "You discovered what they were." She moved to the vaults. 3 were sealed. The 4th, smallest, stood open. Inside, a single aluminum equipment case and a sealed envelope. The envelope was addressed, "To the last Voss." Alina's hands trembled as she tore it open. The letter was in Isolde's cramped, furious script. "If you read this, I am dead and the predators circle. Reginald Crane stripped the Voss name of everything we built. He poisoned the board, fabricated research theft charges, destroyed my reputation. But I did not lose our fortune, and I did not lose my mind. I liquidated everything. The patents, the instruments, the properties. I turned it into silence. Inside the case, you will find bearer instruments worth $60 million. Physical certificates, untraceable, whoever holds them owns the wealth. Alongside them is the original documentation of the Meridian cardiac drug fraud, the suppressed phase III data, the altered mortality statistics, the bribed regulators. The Cranes have spent 40 years searching for what would put their empire in federal prison. They will come for the house. They will come for you. Do not trust them. If they breach the property, the vault is yours to command. The blue lever seals the perimeter. The yellow wheel opens the path to the boathouse. Survive. Alina unlatched the case. Inside, waterproof sleeves held crisp certificates, bearer bonds, negotiable instruments. Millions. Beneath them, a hard drive in a Faraday pouch containing the original datasets. All her debts. Her father's shame, her ruined career, erased. She was wealthy. A crash echoed from above. Alina froze, blood draining from her face. Someone had kicked in the kitchen door. Check the upper floors. Pull up the floorboards if necessary. Victor's voice carried down the ventilation shaft. He hadn't waited. He'd realized she knew too much, returned under storm cover with enforcers. Alina looked at the ceiling, panic constricting. She was trapped 50 feet underground. Heavy footsteps thundered across the floorboards above. She ran to the security monitors on the steel table, flipped switches. Screens flickered, grainy feeds from hidden cameras throughout the house. On screen 4, Victor Crane in the main hall, flanked by 2 men carrying pry bars and what were unmistakably suppressed pistols. He's not on the second floor, Mr. Crane, then check the observatory, Dimitri. Victor's polished voice had stripped to something feral. Find her. If she's seen the patent files, she knows too much. We make it appear structural. Find the woman, silence her, and burn this rotting heap. Alina's breath hitched. They weren't negotiating. They were here to erase her. On screen, Dimitri entered the observatory. Stopped. Shone his light on the shattered cabinet, the gaping hole in the plaster. Mr. Crane, you must see this. Victor appeared. Saw the hidden staircase. His face transformed, realization, then rage. The bitch, he whispered. She actually built it. Go down, now. Alina heard boots hitting the iron stairs, descending. She slammed the case shut, slung it across her chest. Ran to the control console beside the generator. Isolde's letter. The blue lever seals the perimeter. The yellow wheel opens the path. On screen, Dimitri sprinted down the spiral, raising his weapon. Alina grabbed the heavy blue lever and yanked downward. A mechanical siren wailed. Hydraulics engaged. The blast door began swinging shut with freight train force. Above, the men realized. He's down there, stop the door, Victor screamed. Dimitri fired. Bullets sparked against the closing steel, whining as they ricocheted. Alina ducked behind the steel table as the vault door slammed shut with earth-shaking finality. Deadbolts shot home, sealed inside, but safe from bullets. She didn't pause. She scrambled to the far wall behind the magnetic boards. There, a heavy industrial pipe with a large yellow wheel. The yellow wheel opens the path. Alina gripped the cold iron and turned. It resisted, decades of corrosion fighting her. She planted boots against the wall, straining, muscles burning. The wheel broke free with a crack of rust. A section of concrete beside her hissed, depressurizing. It swung outward, a disguised pressure door, revealing a narrow tunnel carved through bedrock, shored with timber. Alina grabbed her headlamp, hoisted the case of millions, and plunged in. The air was foul, wet earth, salt, ancient stone. She ran crouched, light beam bouncing off damp walls. Above, faintly, the muffled hammering of Victor's men against impenetrable steel. The tunnel stretched. Wooden supports groaned. Finally, it sloped sharply upward. Dead end, a wooden hatch covered in roots and gravel. Alina dropped the light, placed both hands on rotting wood, shoved upward. It splintered. Cool, rain-washed night air. She hauled herself out, collapsing onto wet stone, gasping. She was inside the ruins of the old boathouse, at the cliff edge of the Voss property, entirely concealed by spruce bloedom. Below, the Atlantic crashed against granite. Above, the fire road where she'd parked the Subaru. Alina didn't look back. Clutching the case like a vital organ, she sprinted through driving rain, ignoring brambles tearing her clothes. She reached the car, fumbled keys with shaking hands, threw herself inside. Locked doors, ignition, engine roar. She sped away from the dark silhouette of Voss house. In the rearview mirror, it stood as it had for decades, silent, decaying, keeping its secrets. Only now it was a tomb. The vault door opened only from inside, or with industrial cutting equipment. Victor Crane and his men were sealed in the stairwell, trapped between the destroyed observatory and the impenetrable bunker. Alina didn't drive to a motel. She drove south, not stopping until dawn broke over Boston's skyline. She parked outside the brutalist headquarters of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. She walked into the lobby, exhausted, covered in plaster dust and blood from bramble tears, gripping a case holding $60 million and the destruction of a pharmaceutical empire. Within 72 hours, the story detonated. Federal agents raided Meridian Biotech headquarters in Cambridge, seizing servers, arresting executives. Victor Crane was found by Coast Guard rescue alongside his 2 armed accomplices, dehydrated and screaming in the sealed stairwell of the abandoned Maine farmhouse. They were charged with attempted murder, racketeering, and decades of pharmaceutical fraud, based on the pristine digital evidence Alina surrendered. As for Alina, liquidating the bearer instruments required patience and legal navigation, handled by Marcus Cole's firm. A month later, he watched her sign final paperwork transferring the cleaned funds to her accounts. She paid her father's creditors that afternoon. She withdrew her wrongful termination lawsuit. She no longer needed the museum's validation. A week later, Alina returned to Voss house. It was a bright September morning, the storm long past, air smelling of salt and drying spruce. She stood on the fire road, looking up at the Second Empire wreck. It was no longer a symbol of decay or a deadly trap. Alina pulled new blueprints from her satchel drawings by preservation architects who specialized in scientific landmarks. She would restore the copper dome. She would repair the fieldstone. She would transform the bunker into a proper archive, Isolde's papers finally available to legitimate researchers. The false wall was empty, but the house finally had a future worthy of its secrets.